Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, I'm excited for us to return to epic history today as we pick up where we left off with Napoleon's story, where last we met, we were following the events of the Brumaire coup back in August. And now we're going to pick up with the next video that they did. This one came out a couple of months ago, and this is Napoleon crosses the Alps, the road to Marengo. I don't think there are many series on YouTube related to history that are as fantastic as Epic History's series on Napoleon. And I had the privilege a while back when I led a tour over in Vicksburg to have one of the people responsible for this series who helped put it together be on that tour with me. So that was a lot of fun, and just kind of hearing some of the behind the scenes and how it all works and things like that. So as always, I invite you to check out all of Epic History's fantastic content. It's not just Napoleonic content. There's a lot of other stuff they've done that is equally as good, and it's all really, really good. So I'll put the link down in the description so you can check that out. I'm also going to pin in the comment section a link to the playlist that has all of my reactions to their Napoleonic content, which there's been a lot of them over the years. And I want to say thank you to Thomas in Bethlehem, New Hampshire, for your support on Patreon. Let's dive into this one.
The year is 1800, and France has a new leader.
Yep.
30-year-old first consul, Napoleon Bonaparte.
I love that he made sure to point out his age there, because we forget sometimes how absolutely young this guy was. He was 30. He turns 31 in 1800. By the time he's emperor, he's still in his mid-30s. All of this rise to power began in his 20s. It's incredible stuff.
5 months have passed since the Brumaire coup cast France's directory into the dustbin of history. In its aftermath, Napoleon has skillfully outmaneuvered his co-conspirators. And in a new constitution, confirmed by a massively rigged referendum, he's been confirmed as first consul.
So I will say this about the referendum and about some of the other votes that were held during Napoleon's term. It seems kind of silly in hindsight when you study this stuff, because Napoleon would have won big time anyway. In favor or against, would have voted heavily in favor of this new constitution, even without doctoring the numbers to make them look almost unanimous. So I don't know exactly what he was thinking there, or what the strategy was behind making it so lopsided, because it still probably would have been 60, 70, 80% even without the doctoring.
Alongside new consuls, Cambaceres and Lebrun. Napoleon wields enormous executive power and is eager to use it.
It's always been interesting to me that in the aftermath of these revolutions where you overthrow what you see as a tyranny, you just replace it with another person who wields power. You had Robespierre wielding power. Now, granted, nominally at least you had directories and you had consuls and you had other people who had authority, but very often it ends up being centralized in one person.
First, he offers an amnesty to royalist rebels in the Vendée, helping to pacify the region and freeing up troops. Then he creates a new national bank to restore confidence and growth to France's dysfunctional economy.
This just goes to show you once again that we make a mistake when we think of Napoleon as simply a military leader. He had his hands in everything, and he was actually pretty good at everything. He was involved in politics and science and religion and laws, writing of laws, and establishing control right down to the smallest commune.
He strengthens the gendarmerie, the paramilitary police, and orders it to take ruthless action against bandits who infest the French countryside. And he transforms French government,
law and order,
personally appointing prefects to govern every French département.
What does that all sound like to you when you look at it? Rome, right? I mean, he modeled so much of this after the Roman style of government.
As well as sub-prefects, and even the mayors of larger towns. Each achievement is trumpeted by the few newspapers still allowed to print. and which are now entirely under state control. But there is no reason to doubt Napoleon's immense popularity.
Yeah.
And that his remarkable energy has begun to drag France out of chaos and torpor.
And honestly, this is about the point where, I mean, early on, from the time that he becomes first consul to the time he becomes emperor in late 1804, there's a time period there where I still think you can largely label who Napoleon is and what he's done as a net positive, especially for France. It's only after he becomes emperor and you start seeing the more offensive action that's being taken place. Because remember, most of these coalition wars were declared by other people against France. And Napoleon could argue that he, even when he went on the offensive in places like Italy, that he was defending France by taking this action. The further you get into his reign, the less you can make that argument.
However, his reputation has been forged in war. And with France facing another military crisis, he must quickly turn the situation around, or his rule could end as suddenly as it began.
I offered peace to the Austrian emperor. He did not wish it. We now have to take it by the throat.
France is threatened on two fronts by the armies of Austria, which has 200,000 men in the field. In Germany, France's most powerful force, General Moreau's Army of the Rhine, is poised to launch a counterattack.
And this is just echoes of what happened in years previous, right? You had armies up here on the Rhine, and then you had Napoleon's army of Italy that was fighting down here.
Moreau is a skilled commander with influential friends, who had himself turned down an invitation to lead a coup against the Directory. Napoleon, warily respectful for now, offers advice, but will leave Moreau to wage his own campaign.
As long as he can win.
It is
then I'll
in
jump
Italy that Napoleon identifies the greatest threat and the greatest opportunity. Three years ago, Napoleon's stunning victories had left France dominating northern Italy. But in 1799, forces of the Second Coalition, led by the great Russian general Alexander Suvorov, had won a series of crushing victories over the French. He had then been ordered to Switzerland. But before he could get there, General Massena's victory at Zurich thwarted coalition plans to unite their armies and staved off disaster for France. The unpredictable Emperor Paul, incensed by British provocations, had then withdrawn Russia from the Second Coalition.
So these guys all look so young, don't they? They were young.
But nearly 100,000 Austrians remain in northern Italy, under the aggressive and able leadership of General Melas. French forces, on the other hand, are scattered, outnumbered, and desperately short of supplies. It's nothing new for France's Army of Italy. But even the arrival of the great General Massena to take charge barely lifts morale. It is a fragile position, but secretly, Napoleon is planning a grand strategic maneuver to turn the tables on the Austrians and crush Melas's army. At Dijon, he has begun to assemble a new Army of the Reserve under the nominal command of General Berthier.
And if you know anything about Napoleon's typical strategy, he likes to have enough forces to counter any significant movement by the enemy, but he likes to see what the enemy is going to do and then react with overwhelming force swiftly. So you can see that happening again here. You know, you got Switzerland kind of in the middle, and so you've got this kind of left flank here and the right flank here. He's got a pretty big army under Moreau up here on the Rhine, smaller army down here in Switzerland or in Italy, but he's got this reserve force that can react depending on where they're needed.
Veterans and conscripts alike are scraped together from depots, provinces and garrisons, until a force of 60,000 men has been gathered.
Good reaction force.
A more cautious strategist may have chosen to reinforce Massena from the west, using established supply routes to shore up the front.
No, because you're hedging your bets, right? I mean, what if Massena reports that suddenly there's not very many men there, and maybe Melas has pulled a lot of these troops out and sent them over to Cray, and now they're going to try to break through there and head for Paris. You got to be careful for any action.
But driving the enemy back on his own supply depots is likely to lead to stalemate. Instead, Napoleon plans to swing south through the Alps mountains and emerge behind General Melas, cutting off his supplies and his escape.
Nice. So you hold with a small force here. You use that force, but as they're marching through Switzerland, if the need arises, you can always shift them that way, or you can reinforce from Moreau down to help them in their action.
It is among the most daring strategic plans in history.
Going over the Alps, yeah.
But it will depend on secrecy and surprise, a swift and safe passage through the mountains, and for Massena to hold the line in Italy as long as he can.
Yeah, you're playing a game of chicken. How long can I hold out until they get hit from behind? And does the Austrian army even suspect that they're going to come through Switzerland?
But while Napoleon's army is still assembling in France, Massena comes under heavy attack. On the 6th of April, General Melas launches an offensive.
Oh look, the British Navy. Big surprise.
While General Ott makes a diversionary attack on Genoa, his main force moves to cut the coastal road at Savorna, driving a wedge between General Suchet's forces and General Massena.
Good strategy.
The French launched desperate counterattacks to break the encirclement, and General Soult wins a brilliant local victory over Ott at Montefache. But the French are heavily outnumbered. After 2 weeks hard fighting, Massena is forced to withdraw into the city of Genoa, where he is besieged by land and sea. General Suchet is harried all the way back to the Var River on the French frontier.
So Massena's got nobody.
News of the army of Italy's defeat disturbs Napoleon. He is relying on Massena to fix Melas's attention. If Genoa falls before he arrives in Italy, he will be a sitting duck, trapped between the Austrians and the mountains. On the 6th of May, Napoleon travels to Geneva to join the Army of the Reserve and order the offensive to begin.
An army can pass always in any season wherever two men can set their feet. I mean, that's optimistic. But when you start thinking about moving artillery, which is important to Napoleon, and moving supplies and moving horses, it gets a little more complicated.
The Alps. 500 miles long, more than 100 miles wide. Their highest peaks more than 15,000 feet. They can be traversed by several well-known mountain passes,
which make it pretty easy if you're a defending army to know where to scout, where to watch, so you can get reports. You don't have to cover 500 miles, you just have to cover key spots.
But these are narrow, winding trails, vulnerable to avalanches, with no fodder for horses and mules. It's a daunting challenge for an army of 50,000 with 40 guns and hundreds of wagons. Napoleon has decided the bulk of his forces will cross at the Great St. Bernard Pass, at an elevation of 8,100 feet. On the 15th of May, General Lannes and his advance guard begin the climb.
It's a good time of year to go, though. You're right at the end of the coldest part of the year. You're going to start getting the snows melting. It should be more passable, and by this point, drier than immediately after the snows melt and you get a lot of mud.
Even in late spring, the mountains are blanketed in deep snow. To reduce the risk of avalanche, they march at night and early morning. A strict silence is enforced. The only noise, the howling wind and crunching snow.
So why would they march at night? Because when the sun comes up and it starts to put some heat on that snow and starts to melt some of it, that's when you're more likely to get an avalanche.
The barrel of each cannon weighs around half a ton. General Marmont, commanding the artillery, comes up with the idea of laying them in hollowed-out tree trunks so they can be hauled like sleds.
Instead of wheels.
Lannes' advance guard snakes up the 8-mile trail. It's 5 hours of grueling uphill marching, and at several points the men are close to mutiny. But they make it.
And then when you get to the other side, you get combat to look forward to.
At 8,100 feet, they reach the summit of the pass and the St. Bernard Hospice, where food and rest has been prepared. The rest of the army completes the crossing over the next 10 days.
This artwork's fantastic. I love it.
It is a testament to General Berthier's planning that just 5 men and a single cannon are lost.
Wow.
Contrary to Napoleonic propaganda, the first consul made the crossing on a sure-footed mule, trailing the army, rather than leading it on a charger. Lannes' advance guard presses forward into the Aosta Valley. They sweep aside small Austrian outposts, then surprise and scatter a whole battalion at Châtillon. But
it's amazing to me that there's an element of surprise here, because you have to think that the Austrians are getting reports about what's happening, unless they're just trying to slow them down with these small outposts, thinking that they're going to wait until Napoleon gets his army into a more advantageous position for them to be able to destroy it.
Nasty surprise awaits at Fort Bard. The fort, held by the indomitable Captain Bernkopf and 400 troops, dominates the pass with its heavy artillery.
You could hold a place like that with 400 troops and some artillery against an army of 50,000, at least for a little while.
Infantry and cavalry can skirt around it by means of a goat path, but artillery and wagons will be seriously delayed until Fort Bard is taken. A first assault by French grenadiers fails, with 200 casualties. The fort remains defiant, and for Napoleon, the clock is ticking.
Yeah, you can't get slowed down here. Look at how many times in history the whole trajectory of an attack has been changed because of being slowed down. A couple of examples just from the 20th century. In 1914, when the Germans have to go through Belgium, they have a timetable on how quickly they have to get through Belgium in order to get into France and get around the French army so that they can destroy them as part of their Schlieffen plan before going east to confront the Russians. In 1944, the very first day of the Battle of the Bulge, you have this INR, Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon, that basically slows down the entire invasion by the Germans for an entire day because they're holding them up at one spot. And it buys just that enough time for example, the 101st Airborne and the 82nd Airborne to get bussed in or trucked into key locations. Hours or a day can make all the difference in the world.
In Italy, the French position is increasingly desperate. On the 15th of May, the garrison of Savorna surrenders. In Genoa, Massena conducts a brave and active defense. Though in one sortie, General Soult is badly wounded and captured. But now, starvation looms. There are already reports of cannibalism. Napoleon cannot wait for Fort Bard to fall.
Go around!
The army must push on without its guns and baggage, and hope to capture supplies from the Austrians. On the 23rd of May, Lannes attacks the enemy at Ivrea, taking the town and citadel. 3 days later, he defeats General Hadig near the village of Romano.
So in the end, they just go around Fort Bard. You would think there'd be a way to defend that pass, but you can't always cover everything. And who was it? General Patton, who said that fixed fortifications are monuments to the stupidity of man. Well, not at this time, but eventually they would be.
The Austrians fall back on Turin. With 30,000 French troops now pouring into Lombardy, Napoleon has done it. He has completed one of the most famous marches in history. Italy is wide open, and the Austrians are scrambling to respond.
And remember, those same mountains are between any potential reinforcements and Italy. So they're going to have to go through, if they've got to go through to get word out that they need help, and they've got to have those same reinforcements come through those mountains. We have struck here like lightning. The enemy can hardly believe it. Blitzkrieg.
Melas quickly grasps the significance of Napoleon's maneuver. He immediately recalls Elsnitz's corps from the French frontier and sends his forces to guard the River Po crossings. He assumes the French will march to relieve Genoa. But despite the desperate plight of Massena and his starving garrison, Napoleon turns east, towards Milan.
He's not going to do what the enemy thinks he's going to do, because that's what the enemy wants him to do, because that's what they're prepared for. You want your enemy to be guessing. You want to make him respond to your movements, and you give yourself the advantage. You give yourself the element of surprise.
General Vukasovic holds the city, but heavily outnumbered, he retreats towards Mantua. On the 2nd of June, Napoleon enters the capital of Lombardy. But unlike the celebrations of 1796, this time, French troops are received in cold silence. Locals have not forgotten Napoleon's brutal crackdowns of the past. Regardless, in Milan, his army can finally rest and requisition much-needed supplies.
It's so funny to me, just kind of thinking about, totally randomly, as someone who lives in Ohio. In Ohio, basically all of our cities are named after European cities. Just looking at this map, in Ohio we have Milan. I think Thomas Edison was born in Milan, Ohio. We have a Parma. We have we call ours Manaway. It's outside of Cleveland, but it's Mantua. We have a Parma. Yeah, I think I said Parma. We have a Lima, like in Peru. Lodi is outside of Akron.
3 days later, reinforcements arrive from the Army of the Rhine, General Moncey's division, which has made its own arduous alpine crossing through the Gotthard Pass. The first consul is on the cusp of achieving his grand encirclement.
But
back in the mountains, Fort Bard finally surrenders.
They're cut off.
But its
they have
stubborn
to.
defense means Napoleon will be short of guns and ammunition in the days ahead. Then, on the 8th of June, disastrous news arrives.
Couldn't hold out.
Napoleon has asked too much of Massena. For weeks, Genoa has been a scene of utter horror. Several thousand civilians have starved to death or died of disease, along with 4,000 French soldiers. General Massena, his own health broken and furious at Napoleon's failure to relieve him, negotiates an honourable surrender, which will allow his surviving troops to return to France.
He can be furious all he wants. He doesn't necessarily know the situation on the ground. And Napoleon is doing everything he can to get there. I'm not entirely sure that it's particularly fair, but you're starving, you're surrounded, you're angry. It's to be expected.
The fall of Genoa frees Ott and 12,000 soldiers to march north to join Melas. Napoleon is determined that the Austrians will not now slip past him and escape his trap. And so he divides his army to cover all possible routes east.
He loves doing that.
For once, it is Napoleon's forces that are overextended. And it is Lannes' advance guard that will pay the price. With 7,000 men, Lannes has secured a bridgehead across the river Po, near Belgioioso. On the 8th of June, he presses forward, intending to drive the enemy from the Stradella defile. But unknown to Lannes, he is on a collision course with General Ott's division,
being pulled right into the whole army
from Genoa. He is about to stumble into a battle, outnumbered 2-1.
Bones cracked in my division like glass in a hailstorm. Jeez, that sounds brutal.
On the morning of the 9th of June, Lannes' advance guard fights a running battle with what it believes to be an isolated Austrian unit.
You have to wonder why your enemy is constantly falling back. I mean, you would think there's got to be some intelligence there that tells you, I mean, if there's a way to get it, I don't know, that he's falling back on a larger force that is going to be there to help him out instead of trying to make a stand.
Driving it back towards the walled town of Casteggio.
Of course, a good thing he's just falling back to
fact,
defense.
It is General Ott's advance guard. What rolling hills and tall rye fields hide from view is the rest of Ott's command. 16,000 strong, following up close behind.
And look at the strong defensive position they're falling back to. You've got a river, you've got a walled city, you've got hills here. That's a great place to park an army if you want to defend against a smaller force.
Around noon, the French spot Austrian infantry holding a ridge to the south. Assuming it's the enemy rearguard, Lannes orders a brigade to swing round and attack. Meanwhile, his cavalry continues to Casteggio. They scatter the enemy in their path and break into the town, only to be surprised and countercharged by a much larger Austrian cavalry force.
Know what you're facing. This is poor intelligence.
On the heights, the French make steady progress, until 4,000 Austrian reinforcements hove into view. Soon, Lannes' men are being pulverized by artillery fire. His force is hard-pressed everywhere, and still, enemy reinforcements continue to arrive.
You have to think at this point there's at least a moment that crosses Lannes' mind where my whole command's going to be destroyed. I'm not getting out of this. I have no help. I have no real chance of falling back and getting out of here unless I ask some men to sacrifice themselves to do it.
But Ott is cautious and holds back a large reserve.
Guys like McClellan.
The broken ground leaves him unsure of enemy strength, and he has orders not to be drawn into a major battle.
Gonna let him get away.
At 2 p.m., Lannes receives his own reinforcements. 6,000 men of General Victor's division. Lannes wastes no time. Victor's 43rd line renews the attack on the right. The Austrian line buckles, falling back to a small stream. The rest of Victor's men race towards Casteggio.
I'm impressed. Lannes still going on the offensive despite being initially overwhelmed. He was able to hold the line. This is leadership, and it's not only leadership from Lannes, but it's from his battalion, his brigade commanders, down to his company commanders. This is guys holding the line against strong enemy numbers, knowing that help is hopefully on the way.
Under a hail of cannon fire, their advance stalls. But the 6th Light Infantry is able to cross the Coppa River to the north.
That's all you need. Get one regiment across.
Around the same time, French infantry take Casa il Giardiana, splitting the Austrians in two. Fearing he will be outflanked, General Schellenberg, commanding the Austrian centre, orders a slow withdrawal. Seeing this, Lannes sends the 96th line forward to storm Casteggio.
So this is where you see the audacity of the French that you don't get from the Austrians here. The Austrians had an equal opportunity to break the French line, but they were cautious. The French, even though they've kind of overextended and run into a more significant force earlier than they expected, they're still not deterred from being aggressive and pushing the advantage and breaking the enemy. That's the difference in a battle like this.
With his men tired and darkness falling, Ott orders a retreat to Voghera.
Next river line, next fortified town.
The Battle of Montebello, as it becomes known, was a hard-fought soldiers' battle, in which French determination triumphed in the face of Austrian numbers and artillery. As Napoleon inspects the battlefield, he is greeted by an old friend, General Louis Desaix, who has escaped from Egypt during a temporary armistice. Just a year older than Napoleon, Desaix is another of France's brilliant young generals, who will play a crucial role in the days ahead. He is immediately given command of 2 divisions. Montebello is a glorious victory for Lannes. Napoleon will one day reward him with the title Duke of Montebello.
When he's making all the marshals.
But the larger picture is unchanged. Napoleon still desperately seeks his decisive battle, the victory that may end the war with Austria, and will surely make his position as first consul unassailable.
Yeah, because remember, he built his whole reputation on great victories in Italy. Now he's first consul, and now he's going to, hopefully, in his mind, win more great victories in Italy and just remind the people back home why they voted for him in the first place.
Napoleon allows fear of the Austrians' escape to dominate his thinking.
And I should say, I know they didn't initially elect him, but they did vote to confirm and ratify the Constitution and the changes to the government.
Or he divides his forces, just as Melas is ordering his forces to concentrate at Alessandria for battle. Napoleon has misjudged his opponent. He is headed towards a nasty surprise. A bloody battle that will cost him dear and threaten the future of the consulate.
And it's not real often that Napoleon underestimates his opponent, though it certainly does happen sometimes. But he does well. Some generals are really good at making plans, but then once contact is made with the enemy, and we all know no plan survives contact with the enemy, some people don't adjust well. It's true, and that translates to other lines of activity as well. You have some coaches in the NFL, for example, who they script out their first couple of drives, on offense, and they do really, really well with all of that planning they make during the week. But once you get into the game and you have to start making adjustments, some don't do as well with that. And some generals are that way too, but Napoleon's usually good at both.
Napoleon needed a win in Italy.
Oh yeah, and we're definitely going to take a look at Nelson's battles at some point as well. But that was really good as always. I mean, I absolutely love not only learning about the Napoleonic Wars, but how epic history presents the Napoleonic Wars. So I continue to enjoy that. I hope you enjoyed it too. Definitely check their stuff out. Link is in the description. Link in the pinned comment to my whole playlist of Napoleonic War content that we have broken down from Epic History. I want to thank Simon in Richfield, Ohio, right up the road from me, where the Cavs used to play at the Richfield Coliseum. And Kelly in Stanwood, Washington. Thank you both for your support on Patreon. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.